My corona curls are completely out of control. Hello and welcome to India Reads. I shall tuck it in. Okay, I give up. We are reading My Experiments with Truth by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, and we're just starting part 3 of the book. Let's start. The Rumblings of the Storm. This was my first voyage with my wife and children. I have often observed in the course of this narrative that, on account of child marriages amongst middle class Hindus, the husband will be literate whilst the wife remains practically unlettered. A wide gulf thus separates them, and the husband has to become the wife's teacher. So I had to think out the details of the dress to be adopted by my wife and children, the food they were to eat, and the manners which would be suited to their new surroundings. Some of the recollections of those days are amusing to look back upon. A Hindu wife regards implicit obedience to her husband as the highest religion. A Hindu husband regards himself as the lord and master of his wife, who must ever dance attendance upon him. I believed at the time of which I am writing that in order to look civilized, our dress and manners had, as far as possible, to approximate to the European standard, because I thought only thus could we have some influence, and without influence it would not be possible to serve the community. I therefore determined the style of dress for my wife and children. How could I like them to be known as Kathiawad Baniyas? The Parsis used to be regarded as the most civilized people amongst the Indians, and so when the complete European style seemed to be unsuited, we adopted the Parsi style. Accordingly, my wife wore the Parsi sari and the boys the Parsi coat and trousers. Of course, no one could be without shoes and stockings. It was long before my wife and children got used to them. The shoes cramped their feet and the stockings stank with perspiration. The toes often got sore. I always had my answers ready to all these objections, but I have an impression that it was not much the answers but the force of authority that carried the conviction. They agreed to the changes in dress as there was no alternative. In the same spirit and with even more reluctance, they adopted the use of knives and forks. When my infatuation for these signs of civilization wore away, they gave up the knives and forks. After having become long accustomed to the new style, it was perhaps no less irksome for me to return to the original mode. But I can see today that we feel all the freer and lighter for having cast off the tinsel of civilization. On board the same steamer with us were some relatives and acquaintances. These and some deck passengers I frequently met. Because the boat belonged to my client's friends, I was free to move about anywhere and everywhere I liked. Since the steamer was making straight to Natal without Natal, why am I struggling to say Natal? Natal. Without calling at immediate intermediate ports, our voyage was only of 18 days. But as though to warn us of the coming real storm in hand, a terrible gale overtook us whilst we were only 4 days from Natal. December is a summer month of monsoon in the southern hemisphere, and gales great and small are therefore quite common in the southern seas at that season. The gale at which we were caught was so violent and prolonged that the passengers became alarmed. It was a solemn scene. All became one in the face of common danger. They forgot their differences and began to think of one and only God. Muslims, Hindus, Christians, and all. Some took various vows. The captain also joined the passengers in their prayers. He assured them that though the storm was not without danger, he had the experience of many worse ones, and explained to them that a well-built ship could stand almost any weather. But they were inconsolable. Every minute was heard sounds and crashes which foreboded breaches and leaks. The ship rocked and rolled to such an extent that it seemed as though she would capsize any moment. It was out of question for anyone to remain on deck. His will be done. His will be done was the only cry on every lip. So far as I can recollect, we might have been in this plight for about 24 hours. As at last the sky cleared, the sun made its appearance, and the captain said that the storm had blown over. People's faces beamed with gladness, and with the disappearance of danger, disappeared also the name of God from their lips. Eating and drinking, singing and merrymaking again became the order of the day. The fear of death was gone, and the momentary mood of earnest prayer gave place to Maya. There were, of course, the usual namaz and the prayers, but they had none of the solemnity of that dread hour. But the storm had made me one with the prayers. I had little fear of the storm, for I had had the experience of similar ones. I am a good sailor and do not get seasick, so I could fearlessly move amongst the passengers, bringing them comfort and good cheer, and conveying to them the early reports of the captain. The friendship I thus formed stood by me, and we shall see in very good stead. The ship cast anchor on the port of Durban on the 18th or 19th of December. The Nadiri also reached the same day, but the real storm was yet to come. The storm. We have seen the two ships cast anchor in the port of Durban on or about the 18th of December. No passengers are allowed to land in any of the South African ports before being subject to a thorough medical examination. If the ship has any passenger suffering from a contagious disease, she has to undergo a period of quarantine. As there had been a plague in Bombay and when we met sail, we feared that we might have to go through a brief quarantine. Before the examination, every ship has to fly a yellow flag which is lowered only when the doctor has certified her to be healthy. Relatives and friends of passengers are allowed to come on board only after the yellow flag has been lowered. Accordingly, our ship was flying the yellow flag when the doctor came and examined us. He ordered a 5 days quarantine because, in his opinion, plague germs took 23 days at the most to develop. Our ship was therefore ordered to be put on quarantine till the 23rd day of our sailing from Bombay. But this quarantine order had more than health reasons behind it. The white residents of Durban had been agitating for our repatriation, and the agitation was one of the reasons for the order. Dada Abdullah and Co. kept us regularly informed about the daily happenings in the town. The whites were holding monster meetings every day. They were addressing all kinds of threats and at times offering even indictments to Dada Abdullah and Co. They were ready to indemnify the company if both ships should be sent back, but Dada Abdullah and Co. were not the people to be afraid of threats. Sheikh Abdul Karim Haji Adam was then the managing partner of the firm. He was determined to moor the ships at the wharf and disembark the passengers at any cost. He was daily sending me detailed letters. Fortunately, the same Mansuklal Nazar was then in Durban. For having gone there to meet me, he was capable and fearless and guided the Indian community. The advocate, Mr. Lawton, was an equally fearless man. He condemned the conduct of the white residents and advised the community not only as their paid advocate but also as their true friend. Thus, Durban had become a scene of unequal duel. On one side was a handful of poor Indians and a few of their English friends, and on the other side ranged the white men, strong in arms, in numbers, in education, and in wealth. They also had the backing of the state, for the Natal government openly helped them. I don't know why I'm struggling in Natal natal. I will Google this and find out before I read the next video. Mr. Harry Escombe, who was one of the most influential members of the parliament, openly took part in their meetings. The real object of the quarantine was thus to coerce the passengers into returning to India by somehow intimidating them or the agent company. For now, threats began to be addressed to us also. If you do not go back, you will be surely pushed into the sea. If you consent to return, you may even get your passage money back. I constantly moved amongst my fellow passengers, cheering them up. I also sent messages of comfort to the passengers of SS Nadiri. All of them kept calm and courageous. So SS Nadiri, I am assuming, is another ship which is also docked. We arranged all sorts of games on the ship for the entertainment of the passengers. That's good. On Christmas Day, the captain invited the Ceylon passengers to dinner. Principal among these were my family and I. In the speeches after dinner, I spoke on Western civilization. I knew that this was not an occasion for a serious speech, but mine could not be otherwise. I took part in the merriment, but my heart was in the combat that was going on in Durban. For I was the real target. There were two charges against me. One, that whilst in India I had indulged in unmerited condemnation of the Natal whites. Two, that with the view of to swamping Natal with Indians, I had specifically bought the two shiploads of passengers to settle there. I was conscious of my responsibility. I knew that Dada Abdullah and Co. had incurred grave risk on my account. The lives and the passengers were in danger, and bringing my family with me, I had put them likewise in jeopardy. But I was absolutely innocent. I had induced no one to go to Natal. I did not know the passengers when they embarked. With the exception of a couple of relatives, I did not know the names and addresses of even one of the hundreds of passengers on board. Neither had I said whilst in India a word about the whites in Natal, nor nor had I not already it's not about the whites in Natal that I had not already said in Natal itself, and I had ample evidence in support of all that I had said. Let me just repeat: neither had I said whilst in India a word about the whites in Natal that I had not already said in Natal itself, and I had ample evidence to promote and ample evidence in support of all that I had said. I therefore deplored the civilization on which the Natal whites were the fruit and they represented and championed. The civilization had all along been on my mind, and I therefore offered my views concerning it in my speech before that little meeting. The captain and other friends gave me a patient hearing and received my speech in the spirit in which it was made. I do not know in what way it affected the course of their lives, but afterwards I had long talks with the captain and the other officers regarding the civilization of the West. I had my speech described I had in my speech described Western civilization as being unlike the Eastern, predominantly based on force. The questioners pinned me to my faith, and one of them, the captain, so far as I can recollect, said to me, "Supposing the whites carry out their threats, how will you stand by a principle of non-violence?" To which I reply, "I hope God will give me the courage and the sense to forgive them and to refrain from bringing them to the law. I have no anger against them. I am only sorry for their ignorance and their narrowness. I know that they sincerely believe that what they are doing today is right and proper. I have no reasons, therefore, to be angry with them." The questioner smiled, possibly distrustfully. Thus the days dragged on with their weary length. When the quarantine would terminate was still uncertain. The quarantine officer said that the matter had passed out of his hands and that as soon as he had the orders from the government, he would permit us to land. At last, ultimatums were served on the passengers and me. We were asked to submit if we were to escape with our lives. In our reply, the passengers and I both maintained our right to land at Port Natal and intimated our determination to enter Natal at any risk. At the end of 23 days, the ships were permitted to enter the harbour and orders permitting the passengers to land were passed. The test. So the ships were brought into dock and the passengers began to go ashore. But Mr. Escombe had sent word to the captain that as whites were highly enraged against me and my life was in danger, my family and I should be advised to land at dusk, and when the port superintendent, Mr. Tato, would escort us home. The captain communicated the message to me and I agreed to act accordingly. But scarcely half an hour after this, Mr. Lawton came to the captain. He said, "I would like to take Mr. Gandhi with me, should he have no objection. As a legal advisor of the agent company, I tell you that you are not bound to carry out the message that you have received from Mr. Escombe." After this, he came to me and said somewhat to the effect, "If you are not afraid, I suggest that Mrs. Gandhi and the children should drive to Mr. Rustamji's house whilst you and I follow them on foot. I do not like the idea of your entering the city like a thief at night. I do not think there is any fear of anyone hurting you. Everything is quiet now. The whites have all dispersed. In any case, I am convinced that you ought not to enter the city stealthily." I readily agreed. My wife and children drove safely to Mr. Rustamji's place. With the captain's permission, I went ashore with Mr. Lawton. Mr. Rustamji's house was about 2 miles from the dock. As soon as we landed, some youngsters recognized me and shouted, "Gandhi, Gandhi." About half a dozen men rushed to the spot and joined in the shouting. Mr. Lawton feared that the crowd might swell and he hailed a taxi. I had never liked the idea of being in a taxi. This was to be my first experience. But the youngsters would not let me get into it. They frightened the rickshaw boy out of his they frightened the rickshaw boy out of his life and he took to his heels. As we went ahead, the crowd continued to swell until it became impossible to proceed further. They first caught of Mr. Lawton and separated us. Then they pelted me with stones, brickbats, and arotonics. Someone snatched away my turban, whilst others began to batter and kick me. I fainted and caught hold of the front railings of a horse and stood there to get my breath. But it was impossible. They came upon me boxing and battering. The wife of the police superintendent, who knew me, happened to be passing by. The brave lady came up, opened a parasol, though there was no sun there, and stood between the crowd and me. This checked the fury of the mob, as it was difficult for them to deliver blows on me without harming Mrs. Alexander. Mrs. Alexander is the wife of the captain. Right. And rickshaw here means, I guess, hand rickshaw, which is pulled by a guy. That makes sense why he did not want to get onto the rickshaw. Yeah. Whilst I had been effecting my escape, Mr. Alexander had kept the crowd amused by singing the tune. Oops, no, did I jump ahead? Oh yeah, I've jumped ahead. Sorry, sorry. Yeah. Meanwhile, an Indian youth who witnessed the incident had to run to the police station. The police superintendent, Mr. Alexander, sent a posse of men, posse, I think it's called posse of men, to ring me round and escort me safely to the destination. They arrived in time. The police station lay on our way. As we reached there, the superintendent asked me to take refuge in the station, but I gratefully declined the offer. They are sure to quiet down when they realize their mistake, I said. I have trust in their sense of fairness. Escorted by the police, I arrived without further harm at Mr. Rustamji's place. I had bruises all over but no abrasions except in one place. Dr. Dadi Barjor, the ship's doctor who was on the spot, rendered the best possible help. Imagine what the wife and kids are thinking. There was quiet inside, but outside the whites surrounded the place. Night was coming on, and the yelling crowd was shouting, "We must have Gandhi!" The quick sighted police superintendent was already there trying to keep the crowds under control, but not by threats, but by humoring them. He was not entirely free from anxiety. He sent a message to this effect: "If you would save your friend's house and property and also your family, you should escape from the house in disguise, as I suggest." Thus, on one and the same day, I was faced with two contradictory positions. When danger to life had not been more than imaginary, Mr. Lawton advised me to launch forth openly. I accepted the advice. When danger was quite real, another friend gave me contrary advice and I accepted that too. Who can say whether I did so because I saw that my life was in jeopardy or because I did not want to put my friend's life and property of the lives of my wife and children in danger? Who can say for certain that I was right both when I faced the crowd in the first instance bravely, as it was said, and when I escaped from it in disguise? It is idle to adjudicate upon the right and wrong of incidents that have already happened. It is useful to understand them and, if possible, to learn a lesson from them for the future. It is difficult to say for certain how a particular man would act in a particular set of circumstances. We can also see that judging a man from his outward act is no more than doubtful inference, inasmuch as it is not based on sufficient data. Be as it may, the preparations for the escape made me forget my injuries. As suggested by the superintendent, I put on an Indian constable's uniform and wore on my head a Madrasi scarf. Wrapped around a plate to serve as helmet, two detectives accompanied me. One of them disguised as an Indian merchant with his face painted to resemble that of an Indian. I forgot the disguise of the other. We reached a neighboring shop by a by-lane, making our way through the gunny bags piled into the godown, escaped by the gate of the shop, and threaded our way through the crowd to a carriage that had been kept for me at the end of the street. In this, we drove off to the same police station where Mr. Alexander had offered me a refuge a short time before, and I thanked him and the detective officers. While sad I had been effecting my escape, Mr. Alexander had kept the crowds amused by singing the tune, "Hang old Gandhi on the sore apple tree." While he was informed of my safe arrival at the police station, he thus broke the news to the crowd: "Well, your victim has made good his escape through a neighboring shop. You had better go home now." Some of them were angry, some others laughed, some refused to believe the story. "Well then," said the superintendent, "if you do not believe me, you may appoint one or two representatives who I am ready to take inside the house. If they succeed in finding Gandhi, I shall gladly deliver him to you. If they fail, you must disperse. I am not sure you have any intention of destroying Mr. Rustamji's house or harming Mr. Gandhi's wife or children." The crowd sent the representatives to search the house. They soon returned with disappointing news, and the crowd broke up at last, most of them admiring the superintendent's tactful handling of the situation and a few fretting and fuming. The late Mr. Chamberlain, who was then the Secretary of the State for the Colonies, cabled asking the Natal government to prosecute my assailants. Mr. Escombe sent for me expressing his regret for the injuries I had sustained and said, "Believe me, I cannot feel happy over the least little injury done to your person. You had a right to accept Mr. Lawton's advice and face the worst, but I am sure if you had considered my suggestion, these sad occurrences would not have happened. If you can identify the assailants, I am prepared to arrest and prosecute them. Mr. Chamberlain also desires me to do so." To which I gave the following reply. I do not want to persecute anyone if it is possible that I may be able to identify one or two of them, but what is the use of getting them punished? Besides, I do not hold the assailants to blame. They were given to understand that I had made exaggerated statements in India about the whites in Natal and calumniated them. If they believe these reports, it is no wonder that they were enraged, the leaders, and if you may permit to say so, you are to be blamed. You could have guided the people properly, and you also believed Reuters and assumed that I might have indulged in exaggeration. I do not want to bring anyone to book. I am sure that when the truth comes out, they will be sorry for their conduct. Would you mind giving me this writing, said Mr. Escombe, because I will have to cable this to Mr. Chamberlain to that effect. I do not want you to make any statement in haste. You may, if you like, consult Mr. Lawton and your other friends before you come to a final decision. I may confess, however, that if you waive the right of bringing your assailants to book, you will considerably help me in restoring quiet, besides enhancing your own reputation. Thank you, said I. I need not consult anyone. I have made my decision in the matter before I came to you. It is my conviction that I should not prosecute the assailants, and I am prepared at this moment to reduce my decision to writing. With this, I gave him the necessary statement. The calm after the storm. I had not left the police station when, after 2 days, I was taken to see Mr. Escombe. 2 constables were sent to protect me, though no such precaution was then needed. On the day of the landing, as soon as the yellow flag was lowered, a representative of the Natal Advertiser had come to interview me. He asked me a number of questions, and in reply, I had been able to refute every one of the charges that had been levied against me. Thanks to Sir Firoz Shah Mehta, I had delivered only written speeches in India, and I had copies of them all, as well as of my other writings. I gave the interviewer all of this literature and showed him that in India I had said nothing which I had not said in South Africa in stronger language. I had also shown him that I had no hand in bringing the passengers of the Colourland and Naderi to South Africa. Many of them were old residents, and most of them, far from wanting to stay in Natal, meant to go to Transvaal. In those days, the Transvaal offered better prospects than Natal to those coming in search of wealth, and most Indians therefore preferred to go there. The interview and my refusal to prosecute the assailants produced such a profound impression that the Europeans of Durban were ashamed of their conduct. The press declared me to be innocent and condemned the mob. Thus, the lynching ultimately proved to be a blessing for me, that is, for the cause. It enhanced the prestige of the Indian community in South Africa and made my work easier. In 3 or 4 days, I went to my house, and it was not long before I settled down again. The incident added to my professional practice. But if it enhanced the prestige of the community, it also fanned the flame for prejudice against it. As soon as it was proven that the Indians could put up a manly fight, they came to be regarded as danger. 2 bills were introduced in the Natal Legislative Assembly, one of them calculated to affect the Indian trader adversely, and the other to impose a stringent restriction on the Indian immigration. Fortunately, the fight for franchise had resulted in a decision to this effect, that no enactment might be passed against the Indians as such. That is, say that the law should make no distinctions of color or race. The language of the bills above mentioned made them applicable to all, but their object undoubtedly was to impose further restrictions on the Indian residents of Natal. The bills considerably increased my public work and made the community more alive than ever to their sense of duty. They were translated into the Indian languages and fully explained so as to bring home to the community their subtle implications. We appealed to the colonial secretary, but he refused to interfere, and the bills became law. Public work now began to absorb most of my time. Sergeant Mansuklal Nazar, who, as I have said, was already in Durban, came to stay with me, and as he gave his time to public work, he lightened my burden to some extent. Said Adamji Mia Khan had, in my absence, discharged his duty with great credit. He had increased the membership and added about £1,000 to the coffers of the Natal Indian Congress. The awakening caused by the bills and the demonstration against the passengers, I turned to good account by making an appeal for membership and funds, which now amounted to £5,000. My desire was to secure for the Congress a permanent fund so that it might procure property of its own and then carry on its work out of the rent of the property. This was my first experience of managing a public institution. I placed my proposal before my co-workers and they welcomed it. The property that was purchased was leased out and the rent was enough to meet the current expenses of the Congress. The property was vested in a strong body of trustees and is still there today. But it has become a source of much internecine quarreling, with the result that the rent of the property now accumulates in the court. This sad situation developed after my departure from South Africa, but my idea of having permanent funds for public institutions underwent a change long before this difference arose. Now, after considerable experience with many public institutions which I have managed, it has become my firm conviction that it is not good to run public institutions on permanent funds. A permanent fund carries in itself the seed of the moral fall of the institution. A public institution means an institution conducted with the approval and from the funds of the public. When such an institution ceases to have public support, it forfeits its right to exist. Institutions maintained on permanent funds are often found to ignore public opinion and are frequently responsible for acts contrary to it. In our country, we experience this at every step. Some of the so-called religious trusts have ceased to render any accounts. The trustees have become the owners and are responsible for none. I have no doubt that the ideal is for public institutions to live like nature from day to day. The institutions that fail to win public support has no right to exist as such. The subscriptions that an institution annually receives are a test of its popularity and the honesty of its management, and I am of the opinion that every institution should submit to that test. Let no one misunderstand me. My remarks do not apply to the bodies which cannot, by their very nature, be conducted without permanent buildings. What I mean to say is that current expenditure should be found from subscriptions voluntarily received from year to year. These views were confirmed during the days of the Satyagraha in South Africa. That magnificent campaign extending over 6 years was carried on without permanent funds, though lakhs of rupees were necessary for it. I can recollect times in which I did not know what would happen the next day if no subscriptions came in, but I shall not anticipate future events. The reader will find the opinion expressed above amply borne out in the coming narrative. Education of children. When I landed in Durban in January 1897, I had 3 children with me: my sister's son 10 years old and my son's 9 and 5 years of age. Where was I to educate them? I could have sent them to schools for European children, but only as a matter of favor and exception. No other Indian children were allowed to attend them, for these were schools established by Christian missions. But I was not prepared to send my children there, as I did not like the education imparted in those schools. For one thing, the medium of instruction would be English, perhaps incorrect Tamil or Hindi. This too could have been arranged with difficulty. I could not possibly put up with this and other disadvantages. In the meantime, I was making my own attempt to teach them, but that was at best irregular, and I could not get hold of a suitable Gujarati teacher. I was at my wit's end. I advertised for an English teacher who should teach the children under my direction. Some regular instruction was to be given by the teacher, and for the rest they should be satisfied with what little I could give them irregularly. So I engaged an English governess for £7 a month. This went on for some time, but not to my satisfaction. The boys acquired somewhat knowledge of Gujarati through my conversations and intercourse with them, which was strictly in the mother tongue. I was loath to send them back to India, for I believe that young children should not be separated from their parents. The education that children naturally imbibe in a well-ordered households is impossible to obtain in hostels. I therefore kept my children with me. I did send my nephew and the eldest son to be educated at residential schools in India for a few months, but I soon had to recall them. Later, the eldest son, along after he had come of age, broke away from me and went to India to join a house school in Ahmedabad. I have an impression that the nephew was satisfied with what I could give him. Unfortunately, he died in the prime of youth after a brief illness. The other 3 of my sons have never been at a public school, though they did get some regular schooling at an improvised school for which I started for the children of Satyagraha parents in South Africa. These experiments were all inadequate. I could not devote to the children all the time I wanted to give them. My inability to give them attention and other unavoidable causes prevented me from providing them with the literary education I had desired. And all my sons have had complaints to make against me. When they come across a MA or a BA or even a matriculate, they seem to feel the handicap for a want of a school education. Nevertheless, I am of the opinion that if I had insisted on their being well educated. Somehow at public schools they would have been deprived of the training that can be had only at the school of experience or from constant contact with the parents. I should have never been free as I am today from the anxiety of their score and the artificial education that they could have had in England or South Africa torn from me would have never taught them the simplicity and the spirit of service that they show in their lives today. While their artificial ways of living might have been a serious handicap in my public work. Therefore, though I have not been able to give them literary education either to their or to my satisfaction, I am not quite sure as I look back over my past years that I have not done my duty by them to the best of my capacity. Nor do I regret not having sent them to public schools. I've always felt that the undesirable traits I see today in my eldest son are an echo of my own undisciplined and unformulated early life. I regard that time as a period of half-baked knowledge as indulgence, and it coincided with the most impressionable years of my eldest son, and naturally he has refused to regard it as my time of indulgence and inexperience. He has, on the contrary, believed that was the brightest period of my life, and the changes affected later have been due to delusion, miscalled and enlightenment. And well, he might. Why should he not think that my earlier years represented a period of awakening and the later years of radical change, years of delusion and egotism? Often I have been confronted with various poses from friends. What harm had there been if I had given my boys an academical education? What right had I thus to clip their wings? Why should I have come in the way of their taking degrees and choosing their own careers? I do not think that there is much point to these questions. I have come in contact with numerous students. I have tried myself or through others to impose my educational fads on other children too, and have seen the results thereof. There are within my knowledge a number of young men today with today's contemporaneous with my sons. I do not think that man to man they are any better than my sons, or my sons have much to learn from them. But the ultimate result of my experiments is in the womb of the future. My object in discussing the subject here is that a student of history of civilization may have some measure of the difference between a disciplined home education and school education, and so the effect produced on education through the changes introduced by parents in their life. The purpose of this chapter is also to show the lens to which a votary of truth is driven by his experiments with truth, also to show the votary of liberty how many sacrifices are demanded of that stern goddess. Had I been without a sense of self-respect and satisfied with myself with having for my children the education that other students should not get, I should have deprived. I am sorry. I have I should have deprived them of the object lesson on liberty and self-respect that I gave them at the cost of the literary training. And when the choice has to be made between liberty and learning, who will not say that the former has to be preferred 1,000 times to the latter? The youths whom I called out in 1920 from those citadels of slavery, their schools and colleges sent to whom I advised it was far better to remain unlettered and break stones for the sake of liberty than to go in for a literary education in the chains of slaves, will probably be able to trace my advice to its source. Okay. With this, we've come to the end of the section and we will take a break here. So, what have we learned in the beginning of this part 3? Gandhi travels to South Africa. It's not an easy travel. There is a huge storm and everybody gets into prayer mode as the storm gets very severe. All the religious people, Hindu, Muslim, Parsis, and Christians get together. They're praying to whatever form of God they know. The captain also encourages them to pray, but the captain, in a way, also convinces them that the boat has a capability to weather the storm and more, and that he has seen a lot more. Gandhi himself is not very upset about it or moved by it. He seems to be a very good sailor, and so he uses the opportunity to meet as many people as possible and console them, or rather motivate them and make them keep their spirits high. but this storm is nothing compared to what happens when they reach Durban. When they reach Durban, they are given as a procedure, a doctor comes in to check whether the ship needs to be quarantined. Now, there was a plague in Bombay from where the ship sailed, so the check was justified. And typically, the the plague germs take about 23 days to surface, and the journey was only 18 days. This was a very short journey because it was a uh, direct end-to-end travel from Bombay to Natal, instead of all the different routes that Gandhi had taken earlier through Zanzibar, Mozambique, Luma, and so on. So this went on in 18 days. So the doctor advised that they all the passengers be put on a 5-day quarantine, and therefore the yellow flag was put up. Now Gandhi obviously had his contacts with South Africa. They were exchanging letters now, uh, since that he had already docked near the port, and he realized that there was an issue brewing in Natal, and it was also because of the interviews that he had given in India, where people were very upset. People in Natal was very upset of the way uh, they were portrayed. And it was a twofold issue that was happening. One was the fact that they wanted to punish him for what he had said. Second was that they believed that despite him having said what Indians were going through in South Africa, he has now brought in 2 shiploads of people along with him to settle down in South Africa. Now, the second part was not true at all. Gandhi did not bring anybody except for his own family. There were other friends and acquaintances on the board, but he did not bring them there. Anybody else in both the ships, there was another ship which was docked nearby. All the passengers were completely unknown to Gandhi, and therefore he could not have been said to have influenced them to come to South Africa. Now, the important part was that Lawton, his friend, uh, advised him to send. So what happened was, eventually the government had to give in, and people were allowed to come on board, rather come on to land. Now, when this happened, Mr. Lawton advised Gandhi to send his wife and kids directly to Rustomji's place, and he said that if you do not have anything to hide, or if you are not afraid, you should get down and walk the route of the 2 miles to Mr. Rustomji's house, so that people can see that you are not afraid, you have nothing to hide, and you have not done anything wrong. So Gandhi liked the suggestion, and he sent his wife and kids. Now, he was not mentally prepared for the level of impact that he would face. The anger of the people was immense, and they caught him, they beat him, they boxed his ears, and he almost fainted. He actually fainted, not almost, he did faint, and he got up and he somehow struggled. Now, the police superintendent's wife was passing through that area. She got hold of him and she protected him. He was taken to the police officers, the police station, and he was safe for the time being. From there, he kind of sneaked out into Rustomji's house. How he did so was through a rickshaw, and he also wore clothes of a police constable, and the actual constable next to him, who was a white guy, kind of painted his face to look more Indian, and they kind of escaped to Rustomji's house. So it was a fairly dramatic welcome that he got back into South Africa, and he therefore he did not like the second advice of going into hiding, but he realized that in life you have to be practical. While it was very funny because in a single day he took two contrary advice. One was to face the people up front, even though knowing that the people are angry at him on the streets, and the second was to know that he had not done anything wrong, but he still had to hide and escape wearing the police guy's uniform. Obviously, when matters settled down, a lot of people came out in support of him, and he was given the right to identify the assailants against whom legal action would be taken. He was not interested in any of this because this is the pattern that he had set now, of not taking his personal grievances to punishment, but to look at the overall picture, saying that a lot of Indians go through this, so I should not make an example of mine, but I should fight for the bigger uh, I should conserve my energy for the bigger fights that are there, for which I am in South Africa, like the £3 tax that Indians had to pay. So he was more interested in structural reform rather than fighting for some of the inconveniences that he had faced. Now, while this had happened, uh, he eventually settled down in his house with his wife and kids, and the matter was settled at that. Now, uh, the next part of his writing is all about his experience with the Natal Congress. He had left the Natal National Congress in the hands of two of his trusted subordinates, and he found that the activities were done in earnestness. The subscription had increased, the funds had increased. One very important point he makes here is that he realized that every time a public institution was run on a permanent fund. So what they had done at the National Congress was they had acquired a significant amount of wealth. They invested that wealth in getting a property. They put that property for rent, and that gave them the funds to run the organization, which means that they do not particularly need to depend on the level of subscriptions that they did not have an issue of increasing subscriptions or increasing the subscription rate or increasing number of subscriptions. They didn't have these challenges because they had already acquired a certain amount of wealth, put that as an investment, and they were getting returns of it. What Gandhi realized, and this he says apart from his experience across South Africa and now later in India, so he's written this book while he was in India, is that this was not the this was not the ideal way to run an organization that was based on a public movement. He feels that the public movement, an organization which is based on a public movement, should continue to live on a day-to-day basis, taking funds on a regular basis, so that it is in touch with the issues on the grassroots. If they already get the money, then and they know that they can survive without being in touch with people, then the inefficiencies take over. And he gives this as an example for the trustees of religious institutes in India, like temples and other religious organizations which acquire a lot of assets and money, and so the trustees start believing that they are owners of the religious institution. So this is an example that he gives, and he feels that if you're living on a day-to-day basis, you're living hand to mouth, then you are constantly in touch with the people, you're understanding the issues, you're talking to them, rather than you acquiring a lot of wealth and then sitting nicely, and therefore you might not be uh, that connected to the people, and you might not need to work as hard as you need to do otherwise. So this is one point that he mentions. He also talks about the education of his children, uh, which is a really big aspect, and he looks at the system of private education. Now, Gandhi himself is a well-educated man. He had coming from the humble background that he did, he got an opportunity to study law in England, which was really a big deal. But however, he did not give his children the opportunities that he got. He made them study under his own watch. So he would appoint an English governess to teach them English, but the curriculum or the level of education would be set by him. This he did for his uh, children and for his sister's son. Eventually, he realized that uh, uh, it did not bode well with his elder son. In fact, all his children felt, and he feels that they felt rightly that he did not give them the opportunity, but he wanted them to live the ideals that he had set. A lot of his friends and well-wishers advised him not to spoil the education of his own children by not giving them a structured formal school education. The schools in South Africa, the best schools in South Africa were convent schools. He did not agree with their method of teaching. He also wasn't sure that he wanted his children to get that finesse and polish as a Western education would give. So here is Gandhi trying to educate his children based on his own principles. He also possibly did not, this is my reading of it, would not want to sound hypocritical, as his thoughts have been changing. He starts feeling more and more Indian, and therefore he wants to shed that Western baggage. This is again something that I've understood. Again, this is not completely what he believed on all aspects. This is what he believed in education, where he did not want them to have a convent education. In terms of when they landed in South Africa, he wanted them to look Western, so he had Western clothes stitched for his wife and children. Now they would obviously they come from a simple Indian small town, and they would not obviously move to a complete Western attire. So he took the mid path. He realized that amongst the Indians, the Parsis were seen as the most stylish, the most impeccably dressed, and they were respected the most. So he made his wife wear a Parsi sari and his children Parsi shirts and trousers. Boots everybody had to wear. Obviously, they were not very comfortable about it, but as an Indian husband and father, he had the final say, and he made sure that he use that. He also mentions a little bit about the husband-wife dynamic. He feels that the Indian husband considers himself as a lord and master, and the Indian wife, because of her being unlettered and not knowing much about life, depends completely on her husband. Now, this is something that he also says as an observation and as an example of himself. He While he wants to reform his wife, he is not able to do that. He wants to educate, he does not put the effort completely of that, and he sees himself as a reflection of an typical Indian male, where he is not letting his wife be on equal terms. She's unlettered, and therefore he could easily be her lord and master. So these are some of the topics that he has covered in this reading of mine. This again has been a very dramatic and interesting chapter. I hope that you got the essence of it. Do drop in your comments, your suggestions, and we shall continue from where we left in the next video. Take care and have a lovely evening. Bye bye.